Good evening, everyone. I am completely delighted that we have Anya Hindmarch coming to join us. She is most importantly to me a friend, but she is an entrepreneur of an incredibly successful. Oh my goodness, she's so speedy.
I am prompt, right?
Oh, Anya, it's so lovely to see you.
I'm super excited. As you can tell how prompt I am.
I
How are you? Well,
very well.
good, good.
So can I finish introducing you kind of formally, and then
I'll sit back.
you sit back. So and you can argue with what how I'm describing you. So you are an entrepreneur, um, the accessorized business, a kind of huge accessorized business, Anya Hindmarch, an author of a very successful book, If in Doubt, Wash Your Hair. You are a wife, a mother, a friend, a philanthropist, and you've done amazing things. And you're very interested in the environment and fashion in the environment. So there are lots of things to talk about. We've only got half an hour. I'm so grateful that you've given me some of your very precious time. And to begin with, I kind of want to talk to you about the pandemic, both business-wise and family-wise, because your life has always been a tension between, they've both been equally important to you and you care as much about both. And so I imagine the volume was turned up on both enormously during lockdown. And I mean, we're still living in a pandemic. So I'm kind of wondering where you've got to, but how was it to begin with? Can you hear me?
Sorry, I lost you. I'm back. I think that's a bit scary, isn't it? Anyway, I'm back. But I seem to be on 4G, which is rather frightening. Anyway, let's see how we do.
So I was wondering, for the sort of tension between working at home, running a big business, all the shops closing, all of the kind of complexity of COVID. How on earth, what happened? How did you manage?
Well, we survived. We lived to tell the tale. That's the first thing. I mean,
That is a huge thing in itself, because that is not true of everybody, right?
I mean, it was a strange time because actually, as we were sort of being put into lockdown one, and for me it was kind of like a bad flu, we sort of called home as many children as we could. We had 3 out of the 5 home, and it was quite an intense time from a work perspective because we had to sort of hibernate everything and make sure everyone felt safe and work out intense whilst I was feeling a bit ill, and I'm worried. Is it freezing? Are we having an
It
issue?
keeps freezing, yeah.
My office where normally the Wi-Fi is brilliant, but it's flicking between 4G and Wi-Fi. And my tech guy's probably gone home, so we might have to just soldier on.
We'll just soldier on. That's what you did in COVID, right?
Yeah, right.
And I just want to say to people following you who are kind of big fans of yours, do ask questions, and I'll interrupt Anya to ask them for you.
So yeah, it was a pretty intense time work-wise. I have to say, in terms of family, it was parking the horrificness of COVID, and so many people had a really horrible time. So I feel actually embarrassed to say this, but it was actually an incredibly important time for us as a family. And actually for me, just slightly stepping off the sort of the merry-go-round a little bit and time to really work out what matters was really actually pretty important and insightful, actually. And I made a real effort. It's so funny, isn't it, those times where you have all the children home and sort of the noise and the mess and I thought, you know what, I'm gonna make this a really special time. I'm not gonna moan about the normal things I could moan about, and I'm going to really lean into making a memorable time, because actually it's probably the last shout I will get at having this group of children under the roof again together, because they're all about to go and get married and and so on. So so it was a pretty.
You had all 5 with you.
3 out of 5. But it was no. It was quite. We made a real effort to make sure we had sort of dinner every night, and we sort of made a real thing about asking about everyone's days, and actually it was quite funny. There were times when I was selling to my selling week, for example, where, you start in the Far East in the morning and you work through all your appointments all the day and you do the States and it's intense all days. And the kids will be wandering into sort of my sort of study area and listening into my work. It was like having your kids at work with you, really. And I was equally listening into their lessons. And it was pretty amazing, actually.
People called it living at work, not working from home. But it sounds like you kind of wanted to take the enrichment, the opportunity, and that is your attitude. I mean, having read your book a number of times before it came out in May and recently in the last couple of days, you look for the positive, don't you? You face the underbelly and the difficult things, but you do it. Maybe it's your personality, maybe you got it from your parents, but you tend to kind of think, well, what can I do with this? How can I make this? How can I kind of grow from this, or what can I do with this?
Well, I'm sort of such a believer that positivity leads to positivity. And I actually had this conversation with my husband this morning because I was asking him, he went, well, it'll probably go wrong. And I went, I think if you think it'll probably go wrong, it will go wrong. It's like a sort of magnet. I'm a real believer in that. So sometimes when I don't even quite know how it's going to be positive or how it's going to work out, I think by being positive and projecting that, even if it's sometimes a bit of a sort of an act, that actually things tend to go better. And I think especially when you're a leader, be it of a family or of a business, actually it's incumbent on you to be not stupidly positive, but to find the silver linings, to be realistic, obviously, but to try and actually encourage people to see the good in things. I think it makes for a nicer work atmosphere, and I like all of that. But sometimes it's hard.
It is hard. I mean, I think in my trade, that's called a growth mindset.
Oh.
And that, I mean, it's very cruel in a way, nature, because you're right. People who have hope and a positive attitude tend to do better because they're magnets. People believe in them, trust in them. They want to follow the hope. They want to follow the silver lining. And then people who kind of tend to be very negative have a much harder time because they don't, connection and relationships are what matters most, whether it's in business.
Can I ask you a question? I know it's meant to be the other way around, but you can learn that by example. And I feel that I often think when I'm interviewing people actually that that often the sort of what they had around their kitchen table when they were growing up, the sort of atmosphere of sort of nightly boring suppers, sort of Monday night suppers with your parents, the sort of atmosphere that you get and the sort of vibes you get can often set to a certain extent how you react to things. And sometimes, I have people I work with who might be brilliant, but actually they tend to go on the defensive. That tends to be their sort of MO, or they might, so do you think it can be learnt, or do you think it's something that's inbuilt?
Because I'm a therapist, I believe that the soup we're kind of brought up in has an enormous influence on how we respond in any environment. It sets our belief system, it sets our relationship style, and our kind of trust in life. But I also think we are wired and evolutionarily wired to adapt and change. So that and that we have neuroplasticity in our brain, so that we are also born to change. But you have to have two things to do that. You have to have an awareness that your existing kind of MO isn't working, and you have to have the courage to dare to change, and deal with the discomfort of it. We much prefer what's called the kind of anchoring bias. Even when we know it's rubbish, we prefer this sort of awful familiar position, that this horrible boyfriend is that you're going to go for the same one over and over because of its familiarity. So it takes a lot of work to develop new kind of operating systems. But I mean, I wouldn't be a therapist if I didn't believe we could, and I wrote a whole bloody book on it. So.
In the workplace, I find it very interesting because sometimes you might have that one person who tends to be the negative one or the defensive one, and I like to think I resolutely push to enthuse and to show by example. I hope that you could rephrase that question this way and get a better result, and I really hope that
that's open, isn't it? And that's usually, I mean, you've got lots of superpowers, and people are loving you and say how fantastic you are. They're saying it in the messages. She's a creative genius. I love everything about this brand. Such a strong ethos, and I agree.
Well, my friend there, actually, I should wave to her.
what I kind of lost my train of thought. So what I was that your one of your superpowers is that you use your creativity in every domain of life.
Well, I think creativity is important, and funny enough, I think sometimes self-deprecation is important as well, isn't it? So, I mean, which sort of slightly goes back to perhaps the previous question, but I was just thinking that, you know, sometimes if you put yourself down and show that it's okay to kind of go, oh, I'm the idiot, I kind of got that wrong, but actually that idea is good, then hopefully people realize that you can trip up and recover from it. I was
The humility and the openness to admit your mistakes.
and I remember sending my children off to boarding school, which was very sad, but and so trying to sort of make sure they have the sort of weapon, if you like, to defend themselves of actually having the first laughed about themselves being bad on the football pitch, or, you know, bottom of the class first, so that you can sort of take the sting and then no one can hurt you, and all those sort of tools. But so no, anyway, it's so funny, isn't it? And it's fascinating seeing in the workplace and in families, and of course I always think you parent children differently anyway. You know, that's, I find that, I think you taught me that, by the way, which is that you will sort of, you know, have the same product, but actually I find myself with one child being quite jokey because, you know, that's how I just have a relationship with him, and another child being a bit more serious. And, you know, so you actually parent each child, even in a big family, very differently.
Completely. And, you know, our parents' generation would always say, I don't understand why George is so different to Henry, because we parented all exactly the same way. But we don't, because they bring different responses from us, and we bring different responses from them. So you can have your 5 children and you and James sitting around your kitchen table, and they will all have a slightly different experience of that supper, and also their story and description of that supper will all also be different, and they will all be accurate. I mean, what you eat will be the same, but more or less everything else will probably be very subjective and different.
I find the whole thing so utterly terrifying. I remember, maybe it was you saying, well, maybe it was a book I read about the fact that in a family, it's a bit like peas in a pod. There's only 5 spaces in my family. So in a way, someone takes the sporty slot, and someone takes the clever spot, and someone takes the kind of the witty spot, whatever it might be, and someone takes the naughty spot, for example. And actually, that might not be you, but you kind of get assigned these roles. And actually, as you leave home, you actually sort of find your true self. But when you then go back home, you sort of push back into that same. It's just, the whole thing is fascinating and fraught with difficulty. Let me tell you, parents out there, I mean, fraught with difficulty.
It is fraught with difficulty, and I think that we do have kind of spots, you know, like sporty or clever. But the big thing is to recognize, you said, that that doesn't mean that we can't have all the other ones that are in the family. And sometimes we can kind of block them to ourselves by deciding I'm no good at that. But actually, it's nothing to do with you being good or bad from it. Yeah. It's because you haven't kind of allowed yourself to be in touch with that part of yourself.
Yeah. Well, and also if you think about it, the same gene pool, it's likely that you're going to probably all be sporty because perhaps your physique, which, you know, I think the genetics, one thing I think is true, and having brought up inherited children versus biological children, the one thing you can't change is the IQ, I think, and the physique. I mean, you know, certainly my inherited children are very brainy and very sort of skinny, and mine most as well, but, you know, it's actually, you know, those thin ankles, that's just genetics, isn't it?
That is genetics. Did you are there kind of learnings and things that you took from lockdown, or have you kind of just fallen back to old habits? I mean, in your book you say the basics of breathing, exercise, food and sleep. I imagine you had to hold on to them with a fierce tenacity.
There are moments when a bit of lockdown feels quite attractive, I will admit. And again, I feel terrible saying that. And I'm joking, so please don't anyone take that out of context, because it's not a funny subject. But certainly, if we're not careful, we all rush back to that sort of muscle memory, that comfy coat we spoke of earlier. And actually, I think we need to remember, I've actually been turning lots of things down, which is something I find very difficult, because I'm a pathetically polite person, and I like to help out. And actually, you have to also remember about looking after yourself. And actually, for me, doing little things like walking with the kids and having that time where you're just doing the mundane things is really where you have the best chats. I mean, they can't be forced, those chats. So there's so many sort of learnings, that many of which have fallen by the wayside just because the weight of work and adding in the travel time and, you know, the dressing up and all things we've had to go back to, which is horrific. I am clinging on to some, and I know that I need time to breathe in my schedule, which is not often there, and just little things like that. You just have to try and really remember that actually you're not doing anyone any favors if you're overwrought, which is, you know, I think a
Like
lot.
your mum said, or your mother-in-law, wasn't it? A happy child has a happy mother. But it's you know, this the sheer exhaustion of working mothers is, you know, I don't think that people talk about balance. I don't think it exists. I mean, I think you tip between one way and the other, and you aim for it. And it's very good to have a good no and set your boundaries.
Yeah,
And
it's hard though, isn't it? And I think that you know, it's that there isn't, as you say, there isn't really a balance. I think you just have to kind of muddle your way through, and just try and over communicate to the kids. I think that's the key thing, and to work and sort of find your way. But it is without.
over communicating is good. I love that.
I find the only way, and to be really honest about it, I'm going to be really a useless mum next week because I'm absolutely stretched, and I'm probably going to be pretty, you know, that thing of what we call dominoes, where you sort of bleed work problems into home or home problems into work, you know, whereas I've come home stressed and I can be a bit snappy, or all those things we all do. So I think if you sort of say in advance, if I think I'm going to be a bit cranky, just bear with me. We'll kind of get to the weekend and then we can all sort of relax. I think as long as you're really honest with them, that can help.
And they know that that's her bad week, so they can prepare. They know it's not personal.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they can think, well, why is she cross with me?
Yeah.
So listen, I'm going to give you some of these questions. So J.F. Witten, I'm the school counsellor at Newhall School, where I believe you went. When you were there, did you know then who you were and what you wanted to be? What advice would you give sixth formers? Having read your book, I know that you drew an image of yourself standing outside.
I did. I was lucky because I knew what I wanted to do. But I mean, I think, you know, it's a very sort of interesting.
But you must have just generically known rather than particular. Did you particularly know?
Well, I kind of an old girl came to talk to us at school who talked about being in the fashion industry, and I knew that's what I wanted to do, and I knew I wanted to work in leather goods, and that's pretty rare at sort of 16 to 18.
Extraordinary.
But it was also, I come from a family of entrepreneurs, and it was very much that sort of Thatcher's Britain of sort of lots of momentum around people starting business. So that was quite lucky. Although it is interesting, that age is so pivotal, isn't it? That's often where your kind of your self-esteem is formed, I often think, and your kind of sense of self. And because if you start off well at that age, it's easier to continue. You know, if you get one good break, it tends to lead to three. And if you get a knockback, it can actually, just because that's a particular age where you sort of branch out and make sort of decisions at those sort of sliding door moments. But that said, there are lots more sliding door moments, aren't there? And I think that, you know, you just have to sort of push on. So did I know what I wanted to do? Yes, I was lucky because I did have a very clear idea about what I wanted to do. But did I feel sure of myself? Absolutely not. I was a day girl at a boarding school. I was a Church of Englander at a Catholic convent. I sort of felt like quite an outsider, really, to be honest. So, you know, sort of found my way through.
But did that outsider influence you to be the only woman in a boardroom, to step outside your comfort zone? That must have influenced you, no?
I think possibly that can often be an advantage as well, because you're used to being in the uncomfortable place. And I think mostly being an entrepreneur, whilst it's great fun, but it's mostly uncomfortable. And so I think that does help, that you kind of get used to that sort of sick feeling in the pit of your stomach a little bit. But I think there's a million ways. I mean, I have great friends who started, you know, businesses much later in life and have been really successful. I have people who started young and didn't enjoy, you know, there's so many variables in that journey that I think it's sort of hard to say. But I was lucky that I went to a school that was actually a school that probably is academically stronger now than it was then, and that's fair to say. But it had a great sense of, and this sounds a bit sort of silly, but had a great sense of sort of spirituality, and it was very sort of charitable. You know, we did so many charitable projects. We had an amazingly diverse range of students, and it was a very multicultural and inclusive environment. And we had to spend one Easter in your career at school, and we had sort of candlelit vigils and specially written mass, and it was pretty amazing, actually. So I think it really connected you to that side of your thinking, which is, you know, it's also part of an education, isn't it? It's not just
meaningful, and also beyond your control, that you kind of surrender to some extent, you know, sitting vigil, lighting candles. Spirituality, however it's embraced, can really expand something that is beyond you and give you that sense that you're not in charge of every moment of your lives, even if you're labeling it.
And I am.
So can I ask you a bit about your eco credentials? I mean, particularly this is the second week of COP26, but I saw that it was 2007 you designed and brought out our Not a Plastic Bag and that campaign. So you're kind of 14 years, not ahead of the time. I mean, it was happening then, but you must have been one of the first designers. And now you've got this amazing To Return to Nature collection and the dirt charity that you're supporting with it. Do you want to tell us your thinking about this?
Well, I mean, so in 2007, you know, I kept hearing this word environment, and I honestly didn't know what to do about it as an individual or even as a company, because it's kind of confusing. And so we were approached by someone who asked us to get involved with a project to bring awareness to the misuse of single-use plastic. And I thought, actually, I can do that. We can use the platform of fashion and the it bag to kind of make a bag that's not a plastic bag, to encourage people to not keep taking single-use plastic bags. So it was quite simple. I mean, it went mad. I mean, we had 80,000.
I remember it. I remember it. It was the first time I'd ever seen anything like that. Can I just say that someone you were at school with remembers you, by the way? Nikki Langlands, I don't know if she's still a friend. I remember so clearly you saying, age 16, one day I'm going to have my own business. And you did. I would say you bloody did. I mean, you really did.
So that then led on to the second project, which was in 2020, which was where someone said to me during the first project, you know, when you throw something away, there is no away. And it just kept rattling around my head.
That's such a clever way of saying it. I've never heard that before.
Well, if you ever go, and everyone and their kids should, go and visit a landfill site. Honestly, just go and find your local.
I saw one on a documentary. It freaked me out.
Yeah, well, they're everywhere, and you should actually know where yours is, because actually, if you go there, you'll stop taking all that stuff. Because the fact is, the more we put into the soil, and the more we ruin the soil, and we can't take the carbon and blah blah blah. Anyway, long story short, when you throw something away, there is no way. Which made me think, actually, we've just got to stop putting stuff into landfill. We've got to stop. It's enough now. So I wanted to do a project called I Am a Plastic Bag, which is taking stuff that was destined for landfill to make into something beautiful that you'd want to kind of keep in use. So that was that project. And then during that project...
And was that a big success, or was it COVID thwarted?
No, it was a huge success, actually. And we closed all of our stores in Fashion Week in 2020, just in February, just before COVID, and filled them with 90,000 used plastic bottles, which is why I think
God.
we had to source them all ourselves. But to show what 8 minutes of landfill looks like, just to connect people to that landfill site effectively.
What a statement. Amazing.
Anyway, during that project, someone said to me, it's really interesting because there's no waste in nature. And of course, it's true. I remember once I was lucky enough to go on safari and I saw a zebra die and it fell down. And we went the next day and it had gone. It had been either completely eaten or just sort of absorbed into the soil. And the fact is, nature engineers itself so brilliantly that there is no need for landfill. So I wanted, therefore, to start a project, and it's been 2 years in the making, that is a bag that would never go into landfill. So it would act like the zebra, that it would actually, if you wanted to, you know, it would last for generations, but if you actively composted it, that the worms and the nutrients and the water and everything would, the microorganisms would eat
it. And the fungi, all of that.
And break it down and make it back into food again. So we spent 2 years developing this really complicated, and I could talk for hours, I won't talk for hours about it, but it's a really exciting project, and it has to be with no hardware. We don't buff the backs of the leather so that the water can ingress. It's you know, it's really, we
did learn so much. You must have learned so much.
And it's been a really, I mean, the idea of fashion, which is a massive polluter, but actually,
is it 17% or something?
It's probably much worse than that. It's horrific, the numbers, when you look at it. And it's interesting, you know, we just all need to use our common sense a bit more and think, you know, if we buy a t-shirt, rather than buying 10, buy 5, buy better ones, mend them, love them, cherish them, and then make them into something else afterwards, or pass them on, or we just need to rethink. So the idea of designing fashion that could never end up in landfill was really interesting to me, and so we've just launched that. It's been the reaction's been unbelievable. It's been really,
has it?
Would care, honestly, but people do care. Actually, people are not stupid, they do care, and they want to find a different way. And it's important also that we carry on still making beautiful things, because we employ people. You know, fashion's a huge employer, and if people lose their jobs, then of course, then the agenda will, you know, the environment will go down everyone's agenda. So we need to find ways to do it, so in a not a harmful way to the planet.
So you're kind of creative. Is it just literally you read an article or you hear a sentence and it kind of locks in your brain, and then it just keeps whirring until something emerges? Is that, or you go on a walk and what happens?
Have a glass wine mostly. That's what happens.
I'm very glad to hear that.
But sometimes I think the thing is, something sticks. Like those lines I heard. I was like, oh, that's a very good point. And then you sort of, it germinates. And I have an amazing creative team, and we bounce ideas around. And creativity is a funny one. It sort of hurts creativity, honestly. It's a really weird journey because you have an idea and you think it's great, and you embark on it, and it gets difficult. I mean, this project has been so difficult. I can't even tell you. And we just
and
did.
expensive and risky and all of those things.
I mean, we launched it with matches, and literally 3 weeks before that was a delay, and it's all super complicated. But in fact, actually, we got it to the end point, and then we took it out. We were wear testing it, and in the rain, it got acne, this leather, so we had to go back to the drawing board.
Oh no!
Found this amazing family who all their children are allergic to household products, so they've redesigned them in a very natural way. And there was a wax that they've made, which we use, and we hand wax every bag now, and each bag comes with a wax that if you apply it, then it doesn't get acne with the rain. So we solved it. But these are nightmare problems when you're there with deadlines and customers waiting with orders and so on. But the fact is that
can I just read some of the fan mail? Such a brilliant idea for the bag to degrade if required. It's something we need to teach our children to reuse and recycle. I think our children are teaching us actually more than ever. You're a great inspiration. I would love to. Oh, okay. Anyway, what were you saying about the bag? So part of what you're saying is that you don't give up. So you have an idea and you think it's a great idea. You bounce it around with the creative team. You come up with things, but then you have to overcome massive hurdles. And so thinking about lockdown and family and your job, so when you say get the acne bag and you're going home for supper with your kids and they've got GCSEs or A-levels, how do you manage that moving in and out of home, and particularly when you were living at work, when it was downstairs, you're going up and down?
Well, it's hard, and I won't pretend that I do what I call dominoes, sometimes where I bleed in, and sometimes you have to say sorry afterwards, or better still, you say, I'm going to be
Is your bleeding in like shouting, stumping about? Or is it,
no.
what is it? No, you don't get angry, do you? I remember reading that, yeah.
I don't often get angry, but I can just get a bit sort of, a little bit short, not as sort of sunny as I...
Impatient.
Or there's just a little bit like I'm just, not really sort of as engaged as I should be. And I think the problem is, we're looking at our screens, aren't we? And seeing all these emails coming in, all with another problem or another issue, or something's going wrong in Japan, or something's in Hong Kong, or something's in New York, or
every day.
And they're just seeing us looking at a screen, and we're just feeling all these little sort of
emotions.
Yeah, it's just really hard. So it's trying to kind of, balance that and make sure that we realize they have none of that. They don't know why we're feeling stressed. And sometimes I often find I feel things before I work them out of my head. Do you ever do that? It's really...
That's how we operate as human beings. Is
that right?
Emotions are 70% of emotions are information transporters. So you feel the excitement, the fear, and those two, of course, are transferable depending on how you frame it. But, disgust, fury, all of those things, they tell you something is up.
Yeah.
Something is not right, or something's lovely, or something's going on. And
invoice later. I'm loving this therapy session because that's so interesting, because for me, my problem is often I will feel something and I might, to react on that emotion, or even sometimes eat wine gums on that emotion, or whatever it might be. And then only later, if I kind of actually talk to myself and kind of go, look, you're stressed because you just had this email about that, that's going wrong, you've got this problem, you've got that, no wonder you're feeling it. And if I can get it all out, and then I can rationalize it before I, instead of just feeling it. I know, but I'm totally...
That's the business. That's feeling it, taking a breath, naming it, walking around, having a sucky sweet, talking to a friend, having a hug.
Yeah.
Whatever, things that comfort, connect, breath, slow you down. The slowing of you down connects you to your neofrontal cortex, which is the thinking bit of you, and is open to new ideas. Whereas the furious email and the shit is the kind of code red fire alarm in your brain. When you're on fire in your brain, you can't think properly. You're in fight or flight or freeze. So that is kind of going on. But when you step back, and luckily you haven't acted out and sort of screamed around the office, you can slow down, and then you can say, well, you can acknowledge what's going on. There's this happening, that happening, this happening, that happening. And then once you've acknowledged it, it then gives you the perspective like, okay. And then you can take steps. And that's what you do probably every single day of your life.
Probably live in that fight or flight red zone, that one you talked about. I think that's probably my sort of 90% of my life. I'm not sure. Anyway, you know what? I'm a functioning, dysfunctional, but whatever it is, I'm sure there's a name for it.
You're a functioning, you're highly functioning. And actually you have a lot of joy. I mean, if you were dysfunctional, you wouldn't have the pleasure and the joy. Can I just talk to you about one more thing, which I'm interested in, which about creativity is, so somebody says, what's your treat to make you feel you? Oh, that's quite a good question.
You know what? Actually, sleep. I mean, God, sleep. Yeah. So underestimated, isn't it? It's really the thing that, or just, I mean, I was reading the other weekend about people who desperately need to go to bed because we're tired. We all do that, and yet you end up spending another 10 or
5 box sets.
Just because you just want something for yourself. So that sort of breath, So
yeah,
and I think that yes, sleep is the thing I do for myself. Yoga, actually, I found a lovely yoga teacher, and that's just lovely because it is quite literally breath, and it's just time to look after me physically as opposed to just this part of me. So I don't know. We find our way through. Sometimes it is the wine gun.
But sleep stores the rubbish. Sleep sorts out the good from the bad. So if you have a good sleep, it takes the rubbish, files it away, gives you the kind of clears you, and then settles you again for a clean new day.
I mean, I think understanding it. So I read that brilliant book, and it's amazing. Professor
Russell, what's his face?
Love him. He was amazing, and he said, he was really interesting. He said that actually, if you are seriously sleep deprived, as in someone hasn't slept for 2 or 3 days, you can only lay down in your long-term memory negative memories, which actually sort of
terrifying. Yeah.
It's true, because I am a tenth of myself when I'm tired, and much more negative. So that for me is the absolute key thing. If I can just get sleep, that's what I do for myself.
And to go back to the sort of, I suppose January, February was the worst lockdown 3, whatever people call it. A lot of people didn't sleep then. I felt worse then. Was that your worst? Were you most code red?
Yeah, well, I had a few friends who were really unwell actually during that time, going through treatment, and that was a really tough one actually. And I think just, in fact, funny enough, these dark nights now bring that back a bit. It was quite interesting.
Yeah.
Not trauma, I wouldn't say, but there was definitely, it felt sort of like, I think when we all needed that break, and it felt quite hard. But listen, I'm so lucky compared to so many, so I'm really not complaining. But it was certainly, that was the tougher of them. And I'm sure it must have been, I just, so many of my team, their family were abroad, and they were in small flats, which were great when they were working all day and out all night. But suddenly when they're home and worrying about their parents, so when I really
night and day. Oof.
Yeah.
So is that, for people listening and future people listening, on a good day, what is the thing that you'll take forward from it? When you can, on the good days?
Take forward from what, from COVID?
From the last 18 months, yeah.
You know what? I think that I'm quite happy with much less than I had realised, if that makes sense. I mean, I don't need...
That's lovely.
And in fact, actually, I'm probably happier in a strange way with the simple things. I love, I mean, obviously my family I love, which is a big start, right? That's not so, that's
yeah.
whole thing, so that's good. And I love being creative, because that gives me a thrill. I mean, sort of creating the sort of comment about the cafe, creating that project, or all the ideas that we do. That's such a privilege. That gives me a complete sort of kick. That's great. And I don't need perhaps some of the noise that we all have of
busyness and flights and parties and
sort of all that stuff that goes on of are you wearing that dress, and all of that noise. I was just very happy to park all of that. I'm lucky because I have some really good friends, and I care desperately about them. So actually, it was just nice in a funny way to realise that was a wonderful realisation. It made me feel very lucky.
I mean, it feels like it just completely centres you, that the things that really your perspective of what matters is always there, but in some way it removed the distraction of heading to those things, and that you could just walk and talk with girlfriends, cook supper, be with your family, and it kind of is quite clarifying.
I also think, in a funny way, I think I've realised that I'm a bit of an introvert, actually. And
Are you?
yeah, I think I am.
You
And
can be both.
well, yes, maybe I'm both, because I think I can walk into a room and I'm not terrified to do that, but I actually naturally I'm not. I mean, my worst thing, and it's funny in fashion, my absolute worst thing is the kind of red carpet and the ta-da, look at me in a big ball dress. I literally want to die. I want to quietly walk in with maybe a nice handbag and people can notice the handbag. I don't like that. I'm a bit of a
The
sort of
spotlight.
yeah, ugh. And I'm very much, I'm a bit of a sort of, I like a sad movie. I'm a bit of a sort of deep and meaningful. I'm not really a sort of a ta-da person. So I actually think that in a funny
That
way,
was your childhood influence for having those vigils.
yeah, maybe, yeah, all that time to reflect. But that was an take. And there's some very interesting personality tests, which are really worth doing. I mentioned them in my book, but one of them, just to share with everyone here, is this thing called, because it's quick, it's a sort of an easy version of Myers-Briggs, which is the 16personalities.com.
Oh yeah, that's great.
Done it, but it's 16personalities.com, and it types you basically, and
What
it's
were you? I can't remember.
unbelievably accurate.
What were you? I can't remember.
Well, I'm the I think I was the protagonist actually, which fun enough but I think you can be borderline. I think I was borderline introvert extrovert, but I think I was protagonist. I can't remember exactly, but
Yeah.
it's very accurate and it helps you understand yourself. I find it really helpful.
So we need to draw to a close. Can I just say that people love your cafe? They
Oh,
love the coffee and the walnut cake amen to the cafe,
well, should
and
we?
it's delicious. And
Should
they're worried it's not going to keep going.
we
Can you just tell them, is it going to keep going?
100% part. Maybe we'll do an Anya and Julia coffee morning. Should we do that for all our friends?
Yes, and they can come in and chat.
Yeah, it'd be so nice. Should we do that?
Yes, 100% come and do that.
So that we're a bit more weatherproof. But let's do that because I think this gathering of friends is a very nice thing, and that's the point of the cafe. But it's permanent. It's all about the cakes and the coffee.
And it's in Pond Street.
Pond Street, yeah.
They look, everyone, Alan, the Clutch Collection loves the cafe. Anya, thank you so much in such a busy life to give me some of your special time.
Okay, can't we continue with a glass of wine? Sure.
We'll continue with a glass of wine. I wish we could. Masses of love to you. Thank you to everyone who's joined us, and we'll see you all soon. Lots and lots of love.
How do I log off? I never know how to do that.
Just press the top, the cross top right.
Thank you so much. Lots of love. Bye, everybody.
Lots of love. Bye.
Bye.